Welcome, viewers, to Speaking of Our Words, a production of the Kenosha Writers Guild. We will be bringing you in this format a series of videos to allow you, the viewer, the opportunity to experience the oral reading of the work of local writers, a rare opportunity. Additionally, for your enjoyment and to give you insight into their creative process, we will interview the writers right here about their work. I'm Marshall Smith, and I'm your host. I'm a published poet and studied creative writing in the MFA program at the University of Iowa Writers Workshop. We're lucky to have with us today as our guest writer, Chris DeGuire, a creative writing teacher at Columbia College in Chicago. Chris will read two pieces and talk to us about his work. Chris, welcome.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Thank you for coming.
Absolutely.
What is your first piece? And you can move right ahead and read it when you're ready.
Okay, sure. Well, the first piece I got here, this was written probably about 12 years ago. It's a very short excerpt from my MFA thesis novel, written in first person. It was a lot of fun to work on, and it was drawing a lot from real life experiences doing it. I've been struggling with finding the material for my thesis at the time. It's probably one of the last things that I've written in first person too, other than some nonfiction stuff. Most of my fiction since then has all been in third person. I can talk about that in a little while. But this excerpt here, if you want me to go into it right away.
Yes, please.
This is a story called Nice Guys Don't Finish. I'm trying to remember the title. It's been a long time since I've looked at this. Nice Guys Don't Finish. Our storyteller is Charlie Turner. He's in his early 30s. He's having a lot of family issues going down, and this particular excerpt is a flashback. He is attending a Def Leppard concert at Alpine Valley in 1987 with his older Uncle Eddie. And along with them is Uncle Eddie's girlfriend and the girlfriend's sister, Allison. And this very brief scene, Charlie and Allison, they are in the parking lot well after the show. Uncle Eddie and Andrea are in his van, and they're drinking and doing whatever it is they're doing, and Charlie and Allison are starting to fool around by this tree where there's like one traffic light over there, or a parking lot light there on the end. And this is what's going on. He's probably about 12 at the time, and Allison is probably about 13 or 14. She's maybe a little bit older. So, okay, well, here we go. I looked up at her face, and our eyes met as her hands continued fumbling and groping me through my briefs. She was now silhouetted in front of the light. My stomach twisted again, like that pre-concert excitement of not knowing what was going to happen next, but that it was probably going to be fun. "Whoa," came a slurred, gravelly male voice from somewhere. "Check it out, little dude's getting some." Allison immediately stopped and flattened back up next to me against the tree as this tall and gangly guy in an Ozzy Osbourne shirt, torn jeans with a red bandana tied just above his left knee, a bottle in one hand and a cigarette in the other, long straggly hair like a mop, loomed over us, completely blocking the light. I froze up, my hands planted on the ground at my sides, scared. "You can do me next, honey," he said. He stepped closer and slipped the bottle to his other hand, straddling Allison's legs. She squinted and looked away, the guy wobbling, drunker than drunk. Then he kicked at my feet, nearly falling over as he did so. "Beat it, kid." Then he unzipped his pants as I stood up and backed away a few steps. I was too scared to call out to Uncle Eddie, and no one seemed to be around. Our car seemed to be the last one in the lot. Where the hell did this guy come from? "Help me, Charlie," she whimpered, sniffing, trying to crawl into the tree. But what I heard, though, was, "Help me, Charlie Turner. You're my only hope." And that was about all I needed. As he stepped one more inch closer and chuckled, I felt the anger in me rise. I had never been angry like that before. I held out my hand as if waiting for some sort of weapon to fall into it, and I glanced up into the low branches of the tree, and all of a sudden, a 3-foot-long, thick branch with a bunch of leaves at the end, spread out like a giant fan, fell into my hand. I gripped it with both hands like a baseball bat. No, like a lightsaber. And I began swatting at the burnout's back. I suddenly felt like Luke Skywalker from Return of the Jedi in the early battle against those monsters in the desert as he fought to rescue his friends, and then all of them pitching in to save each other. And now I was Luke Skywalker. It was as if the Force had willed the branch to fall into my hand. Allison would later tell me I bent down to pick it up, but I was still reeling from the excitement of the kiss and near sexual experience that my head wasn't operating clearly. The leaves rustled as I swiped back and forth, the guy throwing up his arms. He turned to face me, and I undercut him in the face as he tripped over her legs and he tried to back off, using his arms as shields against my attack and trying to zip himself back up. I must have looked totally stupid. Allison quickly pulled her legs back and scrambled to her feet as I launched my assault, driving him back, swearing and stumbling back towards the car and running off down the empty field. I stood near the hood of the car, feeling all raged and fiery and out of breath, and it felt good, the branch lightsaber in one hand pointing out to my side. Then I spun and saw Allison doubled over under the tree, and I dropped it and ran to her. She threw her arms around me and inhaled through her nose as deep as I had ever heard anyone do, and we stood there for a moment. "Thank you," she whispered over and over and over, gulping for air. Yeah, that's that excerpt there.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
you're
That was
welcome.
strong writing.
Thank you.
I felt right there in the event. And is that entirely fiction?
I would say that the whole novel is probably about 75% fiction. I was at a concert in 1987 at Alpine Valley. It was Motley Crue and not Def Leppard. And no, it was just me and my brother, and might have been a couple other guys with us, but no. So it's very loosely based on some things that I saw or some people that I saw that have stuck with me, for all of these years.
Okay, very, very interesting. So that kind of leads to the question I had along that lines about how the ideas to write a particular piece come to you. Mm-hmm. Do they come from your life, your real life events, or are they?
For the most part, they do. The stories themselves don't necessarily do it, but I'm always trying to draw from things that I'm interested in. There's that writing cliche of write about what you know. And I've always told myself, and I've always told my students, it's not just writing what you know, but write about what's interesting to you. And things like Concert at Alpine Valley, or I work in a grocery store as well too, so I've got one novel about a kid who works in a grocery store. Things that involve music or movies or things like that I'm into. Generally my characters are into that kind of stuff too. So yeah, I'll draw from some real life experiences, here and there until the story starts to form and make sense of itself, and then it starts to write itself sometimes.
That's an interesting statement. So what I also wanted to ask you was, when you write a novel or a piece, a work, do you see it in your mind already as you start, wholly imagined from beginning to end, or do you kind of discover as you go along?
I do a lot of discovering as I go along. Usually when stories start for me, it starts with an image. Sometimes it might be part of a scene or something that develops into a scene. And usually I'll start writing once these scenes start playing themselves out in my head. I do a lot of pre-writing in my head. I really should do a lot more writing and journaling of them. I don't. But usually once the scene starts going somewhere, even if I don't know where it's going to end, I'll just get it down to the page. But when looking at a novel as a whole, I don't write novels in order. I always thought, when I was an undergrad, 100 years ago, I always thought that that's how novels were written or screenplays were written. The concept was there. People wrote these things from beginning to end. And I realized once I started to try to tackle novels, I always thought I had like an idea. And once I started writing it, it was just nowhere near what was, in my head. So, usually when I'm starting a new project, which I haven't done in a long time, something new, I'll usually wait till I have a whole bunch of scenes, and sometimes I'll kind of know what order they're going to be in. It just so happens that the 3 projects that I'm still perpetually juggling, what I've always thought was going to be the opening scene has turned out to be the opening scene or very close to it. But I don't tend to write things in order. I tend to write things as they come to me, or I usually write whatever's taking my attention first, and then I'll figure out where it's going to go later, or in part of the rewriting or revising process is when I'll start putting it together or try to look for some sort of an order.
Great, great. So then that leads into a little bit of a question about editing. If you could talk to us about editing and your process of editing. I think it's different for different writers.
Oh, sure, and I think it's different for every writer's project too. I don't edit as I go. I'm a terrible typist for one thing. I don't like typing on my laptop. I miss my old desktop. But I do most of my first drafts with pen and paper. I really enjoy writing in a notebook.
Oh.
Part of that was of a necessity for those projects I'm still juggling. When I was doing a lot of commuting between Chicago and Kenosha before I moved down to the Chicago area, I was doing a lot of train riding, and I just thought that I can't waste that time, so I would do a lot of, first draft writing in my notebook there. And in the classes that I teach at Columbia College, that's what we have our students do when they start working on their drafts in class. It's not on a laptop or a keyboard. It'll be interesting to see when I go back this fall who brings a keyboard. There's always one student who brings a keyboard to class, and they are so upset when I tell them, nope, you got to put that away and take out a piece of paper and start writing.
May I ask you?
Yeah.
So this is very interesting to me, what you're telling me. So why do you think that's important?
I think it's a lot more freeing, and I think that when you're typing, because I've noticed this when I type, it's just so easy to go edit. If you don't like the sentence you wrote, you can just delete it. You can click back on it and get rid of it, and it's lost forever. But I think when you're handwriting, unless you crumple the page up and throw it out and shred it, it's still there. Even if you cross it out, you still have something there. I think it's a lot more freeing to write by hand. It gives you the permission to slow down your thinking and your seeing. Because when you're typing, you can type, for those who are good at it, like I said, I'm not, you can type pretty fast, and sometimes you can type faster than your brain is giving you these images of these stories. And when you're forced to sit and write things by hand, it really forces you to slow down, to see the moment unfold in your mind's eye, and to listen to the voice of the story, because eventually once you're on the jazz, as I like to quote Hannibal Smith from the A-Team, once you're on the jazz, the story takes over, and you're just the vehicle for the story, I think, at some point, and the story dictates to you what it wants to happen.
Interesting. So when you do a piece, are you ever 100% satisfied with the piece?
No, I'm never 100% satisfied. I'm usually satisfied with how the scene develops, even if it ends up being a scene that I at some point either cut or rework or combine with another scene. I'm usually happy with, how the scene starts to go. And even if like I said, I don't always finish scenes because endings are not my strong point. So usually if I don't know how to end a scene, but I feel like the dialogue is stopped between the characters, I'll just stop. I won't try to force it, So that's just how my editing process works. I just don't do it as I go, and I wait till I have, especially if I'm working on a novel, I wait till I have a lot of stuff before I even think about editing, cutting, adding, that sort of thing.
So then when you finish a novel or a piece, short story, maybe you write some of those perhaps as well, Do you find yourself rereading them even though you're finished? And
Oh, yeah.
And then going back and changing a word, a sentence, a paragraph?
Oh yeah, and I always read my stuff out loud, and I try to make it a small performance too. I'm listening for the voice of the story coming through. And even if I'm writing in third person, which again, a lot of the stuff that I'm working on now is third person, there's still a voice to it that I think it needs to be heard. So if it comes out of my mouth differently than what's there on the page, I'll make some quick adjustments there on the page while I'm going. But I generally read the stuff out loud anytime I go back to it, which is a weird thing for people to do, but writers who do it know exactly what I'm talking about.
So that's interesting that you read it out loud, and I love that you say that. What do you listen for as you hear yourself reading it?
I listen for everything, but I'm also listening for my own personal engagement in the story. Even if it's something that I've read 100 times, if I find that I'm still engaged and or interested in the story, then I'm pretty sure it's working. I'm aware of not only myself as an audience then, but the audience beyond wherever it is that I'm working or writing. I'm aware of potential classes if I'm working on it in a class or for a class, or any number of things where I might go and read this in front of people. That's when I start becoming more aware of audience. But I'm always listening for my own engagement, because I feel at some point if I'm engaged into it, especially if this is the 100th time I've read it and I'm still interested, then there's got to be at least one other person out there who's going to be engaged in it.
That sounds reasonable. It does. So you have a second piece.
Yes, I do.
Would you
Yes, I do.
go ahead and read that piece, please?
Absolutely. This is something that I actually just wrote the other day. A former student of mine has a website out there called storynews.org, I believe it is, and it's all reactions to news articles that are out there. And it doesn't have to be like a direct reaction to something. It could be a very indirect reaction to something, or it could spark a memory of something that has absolutely nothing to do with what the article was talking about. And this former student of mine, she contacted me. I've been doing a lot of Facebook postings lately about albums and stuff that I've been into since I was a kid, and a number of Star Wars albums has made this list. I'm a huge Star Wars nut, and apparently so is this former student of mine. I never knew this, and she asked me if I would be willing to write some stuff for her website. I said absolutely, So I had no idea what I was going to write about, and she said there was no hurry to put anything out there. She was encouraging me to write something Star Wars related, but I happened to find an article out there. It was a very brief interview with a Star Wars actor, Donnie Yen, from the Rogue One movie from a couple years ago, and he was talking about the Chinese reaction. He's a Chinese American actor, a Chinese actor, and he was talking about why Star Wars movies don't do well with Chinese audiences, and it was a pretty interesting article. But it made me think of audience in general, and the fact that I haven't taught a workshop at Columbia in a couple semesters. I haven't done a whole lot of my own fiction writing in a while. I haven't gone to any Kenosha Writers Guild meetings in years. I haven't read stuff in front of an audience in a while. And it reminded me of the first time I became aware of audience when I was about 20 years old as an undergrad at my first school. So this is the first part of this essay that I'm working on for my former student's website. All right, here we go. You're a better writer than this, Chris. That was the advice my undergrad creative writing teacher gave me the third time I had taken the class. Best advice I ever got. And by best, I mean the most confusing, if not the worst advice I ever got about my writing. And actually, that was the only advice she ever gave me. But that was a long time ago. I'm sure I got advice. Maybe. I was about 20, a junior at the University of Wisconsin-Parkside, and was struggling with the stories I wanted to tell. The creative writing class was housed in the English program, as most writing courses were at that time in 1990, and you could repeat the course for credit. I knew I wanted to write. I knew I was okay at it, as people told me I was, but I kept getting B's in the class. I struggled with material and I struggled with audience. I knew the kind of stories I liked, but I had trouble getting them to the page as my own stories. The class seemed to like my stories, but the teacher didn't. And back then, my understanding of what audience was very little. My idols at the time were George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. They actually still are. Around the time of Raiders of the Lost Ark, I read an article, which I've never been able to find again, not everything is on the internet, where one or both said they made the types of movies they wanted to see. Now, that really interested me, even as a kid. So I tried writing sci-fi, fantasy, and adventure stories, but I never liked what I wrote. So I began writing more real-life-based stories about real-life stuff I liked. And when I started college, I liked cop stories and comedies. The first story I wrote for that college creative writing class was a pseudo-parody of the Lethal Weapon movies, a buddy cop story. Never mind that I knew nothing about cops and detectives, except that I liked those movies. I got a B on that story. The next semester, I wrote a story about an older person going back to school, loosely based on the Rodney Dangerfield comedy Back to School. I was into symbolism at the time, so I had all sorts of stereotype characters: dumb jocks, hot cheerleaders, nerdy nice guys. I thought it was funny, and I wanted to say something about the college experience that wasn't happening to me. The teacher hated it, said the female characters were stereotyped. Yeah, they all were. That was my point. But I got a B. The third semester, I wrote my craziest story ever. The Doors movie just came out, and I was fascinated with singer and poet Jim Morrison. So I wrote this story where God was seeing a shrink, and the shrink was Jim Morrison. God wanted to date all these women in hell, and Jim did coke during the sessions. I had fun doing it, and the teacher hated this one too. You're a better writer than this, Chris. What did that mean? Got another B. What did I need to do to get an A? I knew the teacher hated those last two stories. What if I tried writing something she would like? Then I would get an A. Write for her. Why hadn't I thought of that before? I was a genius. Turns out I was a dumbass. That fourth semester, I was interested in dreams. I conceived a story about a single mom with 2 or 3 kids, one who had these very vivid nightmares that were coming true. I wrote from the point of view of the mom. Strong female character, she'd have to like that. Another B. I was confused. A B isn't a bad grade, but I was working hard, too hard. I didn't know what to do, so I did the most sensible thing I knew. I dropped out of school a semester shy of graduating.
That's a very interesting story. So you had an epiphany there, perhaps, about audience. Is that what you're saying? You think, oh, I'm going to write for her.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really interesting that occurred to you then, driven by your desire to achieve an A.
Yeah.
So that's quite fascinating, and I think that's so important, isn't it? So, how has your writing changed and evolved over? How long have you been writing now? Would you say?
I think I've been writing since I was 6. So.
Wow.
I don't know, a long time.
We won't need
40
to go
years.
back that far,
yeah,
but
yeah. I'm not good at math, but 40 years, give or take.
So somewhere in there, when you came of age to an extent as a writer, high school or whatever, how's your writing evolved and changed?
Well, I think I've become more aware of the kinds of stories that I like, and I think to get better at writing, you have to do a lot of it. And I'm not going to be one of those writers that says, I can't stand all that stuff that I wrote 20 years ago, 10 years ago. A lot of it I really like. But I think what's changed the most is, I'm not as concerned about what other people are really going to think of it. I'm still writing with myself as the first level of audience in mind, and again keeping myself interested. That and writing a lot more nonfiction than I thought that I would ever write. You know, I've written a lot of memoir type things. I almost had a memoir published a couple years ago. And the whole idea of writing in third person, you know, once I discovered, you know, the fun I was having writing in a first person voice, that you can have just as much fun writing in a third person voice as well. And that was news to me when I discovered that.
Well, that's really interesting. Now, one question I have, and we need to do a fairly quick answer, but
Sure.
Is about how being a teacher of creative writing affects your writing.
Makes me a lot more aware of what I'm not getting to the page. You know, when I look at student work and realize, you know, they're not getting this to the page. I've got questions, I want to know more about this. So I'm always asking myself, well, if they're not doing this, I sure as hell better be doing this, because I'm telling them that they need to do it. So I'm more aware of what I'm getting or not getting to the page by reading student work. That's been one of the greatest things that have helped me as a writer, is reading student work. Reading, and not just student work, but reading other people's work or hearing other people's work.
Great statement.
You know, as with the
Great
Kenosha Guild.
Well, Chris, I want to graciously thank you for sharing your strong work with us today.
Absolutely.
Where might we find your work if we wanted to read more of it?
Well, none of my books are published so far. They're still, like I said, in perpetual motion there. But I do have some excerpts from some Columbia College publications called Hair Trigger. I believe I'm in Hair Trigger 28 and 29. And I'm in another Columbia College publication called F Magazine. I don't remember which edition. It's 6, 7, or 8, something like that. I know you can find those magazines on Amazon. I do have a blog out there somewhere. I haven't made any adjustments to it in quite a while, but it's on WordPress.com. It's called From a Certain Point of View. So you can find some of my stuff there.
Great opportunity. Thank you, audience. Again, this is Speaking of Our Words. It is a production of the Kenosha Writers Guild. Please come to one of our meetings, which are on the second and third Thursdays of each month at 6:30 p.m. at Carthage College. The meetings are open to anyone, and we welcome your attendance. Please visit our website at kenosha-writersguild.com or visit our Facebook page, and feel free to leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Until the next video, I'm Marshall Smith. Goodbye.